And I think this is going to be a key thing for people who want true freedom and true governance and true digital sovereignty. You have to be able to look back and say, hey, were the principles of decentralization followed on this project all the way through? And even then, it's not going to be ideal. So it's an even smaller group of projects than that. And now we'll start to see the outcomes of this. And I predict that there'll be some kind of weird rebellion against coin voting, because virtually none of these chains can achieve coin voting in a fair way. So they'll rebel against it. But there'll be projects like Hive out there that maintained it and can still use coin voting to effect.
Anytime I hear governance, I can't get it out of my mind. But you can start with whatever you want to talk about.
Dan's the world's leading game theorist on governance, and it's like constantly in your head at the moment, eh?
God, I hope I'm not.
It's the one thing you went down for as being
yeah.
The man that thought about governance. Well, maybe it's a relatively important subject, Dan. So someone's got to do it.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, I mean, so from what I've been a little bit hiatus the last week, but it's from what you were saying, it seems that governance is becoming more and more spoken about, and it's becoming more and more of a hot topic in crypto. And there's a lot of controversy with that because so many people have just not got the foundations to execute governance properly, in our view. And so there's going to be a lot of weird, like, scooting around the word and figuring out convoluted ways to do governance that allow people to maintain the illusion of decentralization, let's say. So it's going to be an interesting discussion to watch unfold.
Yeah, I mean, when you start off in a situation where coin voting can't work, i.e. you have a pre-mine and insider trading and all that, so coin voting is broken, so you have to reinvent something else. And it's been interesting to hear the philosophies. Meanwhile, while you're flirting with, we'll do one person, one vote, identity voting, we'll do AI voting, we'll do everything we can to take the power away from stakeholders and give it to either individual people, which isn't always great, right? Or an AI, some crazy non-human thing. Meanwhile, you look at some of the let's look at the newest, most popular proof of stake chain, which is Ethereum. You can see they're 23% compliant on the censorship list, meaning these people are going to start adding censorship methods and start excluding certain texts.
Which censorship list is
that's the OF, whatever it was, the OFAC, I believe it is. Yeah, right. the big one, the one where they're going to blacklist certain addresses, so they couldn't. It had to do with the tornado thing, the tornado caching that started all this. Yeah, and it's the compliance list basically. And of course, the compliance list, once you have it in, it's just going to grow bigger and bigger. They're going to keep adding to it. Well, that's 23%. Well, keep in mind that's excluding Coinbase. That's excluding the largest sexes already who haven't, become fully opted in and implemented it, which we already know they're going to have to. That's easily going to bump it over. Mind you, you only need 33% plus one for the proof of stake network, right? The more nodes you have, the less nodes that can come to consensus in that one time, right? So they say, around 33%. So if you're already chilling at about 23, 25% willing to censor, and you haven't had the largest sexes on, the writing should be on the wall. It's
going to get to 40.
Yeah.
It's 40% at least when it comes to it.
So, people, they're hanging on to the fact that, the minority miners can hang in there and eventually get a block in. It's like, what kind of life is that? It's already slow. Now you're telling me it's going to be even slower and a worse user experience, and I'm probably going to have to pay more, and I might be doing things that are, I'm using an illegal system where it's, broad as day. It's like, if the system is already corrupted, they're saying you must use the system in this way or we're going to control it. That's much different than using a system that can't be controlled. So we're going to see the difference very soon. And now everyone's talking about governance. Everyone's talking about ways to, how do we, maybe anonymous nodes. How do we break this up? How do we get away from coin voting? Which is a little sad because it's almost like, Ethereum's the only game in town. So if coin voting doesn't work on that, we have to figure out another way and just completely throw coin voting away. When I'm saying, no, if you start off on the right foot with coin voting, you can have something very powerful. So it's two
Right,
it's
exactly.
two different lanes people are taking. People are taking the, well, we can't do coin voting because it's too late, because for some reason Ethereum's the only thing we have in their minds. So it's like it's a literal, like, you back them into a corner, and it's like you better come up with something different in coin voting. And they're scraping their minds, they're trying, but meanwhile practice is catching up to them. Right, we live in the moment, and that number is getting really big on that base layer. You better come up with something quick, because guess what? How are you going to tell people gold is out when all the kings who rule everything have all the gold? How are you going to say coin voting's out when the network's controlled? And the network's going to be controlled by the sexes. And what does that mean? In this silly little world we live in, that the ticker is the biggest thing, especially if you're talking liquidity for these centralized projects. So whoever controls the ETH, the ETH ticker, is the one that controls Ethereum in the minds of the masses, right? That's just how it's going to be. We saw what happened with Bitcoin Cash. We saw what happened with Bitcoin. So it's going to be a very interesting time. It's very good that we're at least starting to have this conversation. It's a little sad people had to wait to smell the smoke. Now people are scrambling. They might get a little desperate in their ideas, and maybe trust a party a little bit more than they should. Meanwhile, here on Hive, we didn't compromise. So we can sit here with a very true, unbiased way of looking at governance and say, well, no, you can do it this way. You guys might be backed into a corner, but we're not. And we have options.
Sure.
So,
yeah, I mean, the principle here is that there's a set of philosophical principles that projects should follow in order to maintain decentralization. And so many of the top projects today left those principles at the door 3, 4, 5 years ago, which has been fine until now. It's been fine to carry on while the token prices have gone up and people have made money and everyone seems to have been happy. That's been the primary thing. But Ethereum being the driver of a lot of this, because it's such a major token, it's going to have to come to a head at some point. And it seems that it's creeping to that now, where people are starting to say, well, can we do one account, one vote? And my view on that is, yeah, okay, for certain things, one account, one vote is pretty okay. But ultimately, it's going to be a propagandized vote, or it's going to be people selling their votes, right? So you're going to get vote selling on one account, one vote, or you're going to get propagandized votes. So you can't fully trust those. And then on the flip side, they're going to come up with some, this Lido DAO has got this pre-selected top 20, which is a very convoluted way of doing DPoS but it's on a layer 2 rather than on the base layer.
So essentially DPoS models. It's very, very silly. Efficient.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me to see that they've come up with this cross between centralized selection of representatives and then a DPoS vote against them. And it's like, okay, that kind of proves DPoS's case, doesn't it?
Well, in theory, you have thousands of nodes. In practice, you have 2 staking pools. But for some reason, everyone's blind to that. Not everyone, but a lot of people are blind to the fact that you only have a few staking pools. The staking pools run the network because they have the most governance token locked up. And really, I'm being nice. You have one. You have one staking pool. That's how this ends. It doesn't end with 2. It ends with 1. The biggest dog wins. And right now it's Lido. I think they already have, close to 60% or 50% at one time.
Of the stake supply.
Yeah, I mean, and once they get more liquidity and more help and more investment and all of that, they're going to be able to offer better incentives. And the person that offers the best incentives becomes the best. And people only use the number 2 because number 1 becomes crowded and they can't use number 1. So there'll be a number 2, but it won't be nearly as strong as a number 1. It might be even a minority pool where you have one pool that can really cause all the havoc. So,
yeah, sure. This all stems back to the fact that the principles of decentralization weren't followed, and I think this is going to be a key thing for people who want true freedom and true governance and true digital sovereignty. You have to be able to look back and say, "Hey, were the principles of decentralization followed on this project all the way through?" And even then, it's not going to be ideal. So it's an even smaller group of projects than that. And now we'll start to see the outcomes of this, and I predict that there'll be some kind of weird rebellion against coin voting because virtually none of these chains can achieve coin voting in a fair way. So they'll rebel against it, but there'll be projects like Hive out there that maintained it and can still use coin voting to effect and in some way, shape, or form, at least allow the community to feel that it's represented, even though it's using a coin voting model. I certainly feel that, all right, not everything goes my way on Hive, but at least I feel like the guys who have a lot of the sway earn their token or buoy off the market fair and square. And at the same time, as time's gone on, the token distribution has allowed for various valuable members of the community that have stake and have earned stake in the ecosystem to rise to prominence. And those people are able to influence the ecosystem, and rightly so,
Yeah, I think one of the when a negative thing happens in life, you always look for the positive. So when we look at Hive, we're like, well, look at Bitcoin, look at Ethereum. They've been used as liquidity instruments. That means it's outside their use case. It's not a great liquidity instrument. It's slow. It's expensive compared to what else is out there. But it's garnered that moat. And that just means people are going to trade you because you have liquidity. And because you have liquidity, people are going to trade you. And people trade you, they have more liquidity. So it's a virtuous cycle. That's why these billions in 24-hour volume. Well, you can look at Hive and be like, oh, well, that's a negative. We don't have that. People aren't looking at Hive like that. They're looking at more like a bandwidth token, more like a digital piece of real estate. Well, as we move forward, I think it's going to be much more appealing. Perception is everything, even in the eyes of governments, regulators, everyone, right? We're all humans at the end of the day. Perception is everything. If you're perceived as a token where people build applications, people use for the bandwidth, people use it as digital real estate, it's going to be much harder to then censor transactions. Because you're not a liquidity instrument, you're not looked at it that way. You're right? So yeah, sure, you can use it that way. You can, but really, you have thousands of applications all hoarding, for the bandwidth. That's what it's mainly used for. So it's a double-edged sword. It's like, cool, yeah, you can be used as a liquidity instrument, but you're also going to be attacked as one because guess who uses it? Everyone, good people and bad people. So.
Yeah, it's just without touching on the RC system on Hive, I think this most simple way to describe the sustainability of a Hive token is that everyone, especially the apps, are competing for access to the chain. And so the more of the base token they hold, the more access to the chain they get, and the more they can provide their users with immutable, monetized digital sovereign experiences, right? I don't know of any other chains that are doing that apart from some others in the DPoS realm. And it makes sense. It's a sustainable token. As the network effect takes hold, that thing creates a sustainable token. Yeah. And then you have a good distribution model via the social media type stuff, and all of a sudden you have a way to dilute the whales from the ecosystem. Well, not to dilute them completely, but so that they don't become oligarchs.
You need at least one layer that quote unquote socialized where people share, and you want to make sure that layer has as least amount of stuff on it. Right on Hive, it's like a plane. You remove everything off if you need to remove weights. The same thing with the base layer. You don't want smart contracts. You don't want big data. You can't remove the transaction layer. Right, the transaction layer is like the engine in the account system. Like that has to be there. There are things that you cannot remove and there's things you can remove. You can't remove smart contracts. They don't have to be there. And you can't really have socialized smart contracts because the fees spike and they're unpredictable. What you really need is a transaction layer that's as fast and efficient and scalable as possible. And you have a bandwidth layer there that people share, but it's okay because it's not going to cost an arm and a leg because transactions and text aren't highly computational, not like smart contracts and all the other things that zero proof and all these things that are just insanely highly computational, needing their own incentive layers on the second layer. What you're going to really see happening, what I believe the ball is going, you're going to have people are going to live on top of a transaction layer, and then they're going to have their own node systems for their smart contracts. So they have predictable fees. We saw Splinterlands do this. They're a very big game. Like we need our own infrastructure on layer 2. Other people are going to follow suit. They're going to realize, oh, that's a lot better than having these unpredictable fees and all of these things. We have control of the smart contracts. We can communicate frequently with the base layer. That means we don't have to build these crazy security measures. And, that just sounds like it's the future. I just don't see how, trying to have a socialized high computational layer where you're just going to have unpredictably high fees helps anybody, especially as a base layer. So.
And just to clarify here, because it took me a while to get my head around this, but when Dan says it's a highly socialized layer, what he means is that if one of the apps on the base layer succeeds on certain feed chains with feed transactions, what happens is that app congests the chain because everyone's competing for resources on that same chain. But in this case, it spikes the price of the transactions. So what it means is that one app's success the transaction costs are then socialized to every other app who's sitting there like complaining because they're like, why do we have to pay these massive fees just because this one app over here has gone viral, you know? Whereas the idea is if you move everything off the base layer that you can, so you only have the absolute most important things on the base layer that are the slow, I call it slow changing information, and then all the fast changing information you put on layer two. Then you can really and you figure out a governance system where there's a way to elect a group of witnesses. Then you can have a free base layer transaction system, so that these costs, when one of the apps goes viral, aren't socialized to the rest of the apps.
Yep.
You know.
Yep.
All right. Let's read a couple of comments here because some of the guys have it's percolated their thoughts. So Addicted says, one account, one vote has already been hacked 1,000 times over through traditional republics. Basically, just grandfathering in the corruption from the legacy system. He says, honestly, I think it's weird that Dan Larimer is so obsessed with one account, one vote voting.
You know what's really weird? Vitalik wants everyone to have an account, and he wants everyone to vote. It's like, well, what if like most people don't care? And they're like, well, I don't care. I don't like this Ethereum thing. I think it's terrible. I'm going to sell my vote for a penny, or I'm going to give it away. The money attack's much cheaper, you know.
Bro, the votes will be worth much more than a penny, in my opinion. Like you'll get people parting with their vote for a good amount of money, you know, and people will be monetizing that vote. For sure.
Well, I mean, it depends though, because there's a lot of poorer countries out there, and if everyone has a vote, and you know, there's going to be people who sink the price because they're like, well, I need money now and I don't care about my vote. So either way, it's going to be watered down and it'll be much cheaper to attack than a stakeholder. I don't believe everyone deserves a vote. I believe educated people who know about the system should vote, and stake is one of the surefire ways to make sure you at least know what you're investing in, right? You at least, if you're going to put money into it or you're going to have something of value, you're going to know something about it. And if you don't, that's a weird situation. Like it's rare. Most people who hold at least a decent amount of something know about it. So that's the fail safe. You have, and that's the thing. Vitalik and Dan Larimer, they want to chase something perfect. Nothing is perfect. Everything has a trade-off. And the big trade-off is here is like, yeah, you got to, you know, stakeholders, you know, people are, oh, they're bad or whatever, you know, you can money attack it and all of this. Well, it's like, okay, we know the flaw we have to deal with. Now let's build around it and make money attack a virtuous thing, which DPoS has accomplished. So once you money attack it, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah. And when you say that, what you're referring to is the fact that the Hive token price is about 3 to 4 times the Steam token price, which is the chain that it forked away from. So
and we have
it's virtuously enriched the community that moved across to the legitimate decentralized fork.
Exactly.
And this is the proof. This is the real world proof that's needed. Because the thing that I find really interesting about the Hive story is that you can theorize about a lot of this stuff. You know, maybe you know, if you're basing your assumptions on, oh well, a money attack would enrich the new chain. Most people would say, hell no, that's not going to happen. Like, chances are the branded chain, the original chain, will keep its value. And if that chain manages to become corrupt slightly and people fork away, the chances are that the fork is going to fail. Right? That's what most people would assume. But Hive's story disproves that for sure.
Disproves it, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
It shows money's the cancer. If you start off with a lot of money or try to bring a lot of money into an ecosystem, the exact opposite happens. Because what did Justin's son have to do? He had to run all the nodes from his own computer because you might be rich, but you can't buy friends. You can't buy loyalty. And he was sitting there running his one-man army, right? He might have hired an assistant to run it from a laptop. Who knows? But the point is he had to buy all those positions. And now he's at a point where the great thing about decentralization or censorship resistance in a community is, you know, I might get tired one day. And I might take a day off, but the chain doesn't take a day off. Well, if Justin's son gets tired or bored and he takes a day off, the chain dies. And that's a very difficult thing to live with day in and day out. And you get exhausted and you start to wonder the incentives. That's why we don't hear anything about Steam. He has other things going on. That's what happens when you don't have a community and you trust one person. And most of these communities are trusted on one person. If that one person was to go away, the chain would go away. And
yeah, the value creation there is bottlenecked ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, when Steam was attacked, we didn't think Ned was the leader. It was just sort of a group of misfits hanging around with cool technology, you know. And when you attacked us, you pissed us off. So it was a completely different mindset. It wasn't like, oh, you know, you get Steam, you win. It was like, no, everyone who stayed on Steam and let's say they just sold their Hive when it was at the same price or whatever, is doing worse today than everyone that moved to Hive. So the Hive community won. The brand didn't matter. The community matters. The brand can become tainted. And brands, as we already know in Web3, are going to become useless anyway. They're going to be all community run. You know, what do you do when you can't protect your brand and you're trying to be cool, but you're not a part of the Web3, and, you know, a decentralized community takes over your brand, because a lot of these brands are misusing their communities anyway. So the whole idea of logo and brand is going to really go out the window, and people are going to really look for thriving network effects that can sustain themselves in a decentralized way without needing any kind of centralized infrastructure, any kind of centralized funding. Once you remove that, you know, that's what people get on their knees for, the money. When you remove that, that's the biggest hurdle anyone's really tried to solve in crypto. Vitalik and the rest on the brightest minds, the chicken and the egg. How do you get something built for free? Once you get past that, which we have via the community fork, it's sort of how far can you go from there? It's like starting fire is hard, spreading fire is easy. We're in the fire spreading part now.